Thank you, Ryan, and thank you to the RCMI for hosting this fantastic event this afternoon. Thank you to everyone who attended, and I'm honored to launch my book, Through the Rise, A Graphic History of Hill 70 and Canada's First World War, which has just been published by McGill Queen's University Press. I illustrated the book and co-wrote it with fellow historian Robert Engen, who's currently in Calgary, preparing to take a new position teaching at the Defence College in Australia. Today I will speak about the creation and content of our book. Throughout I'll be showing you some sample pictures. It is of course our hope that everyone will be interested to get a copy for themselves. The book is available, as I mentioned, at the back for purchase today. I'd also like to mention briefly that my other book, Scandalous Conduct, Canadian Officers' Courts Martial, 1914 to 45, has just been released in paperback by UBC Press, and that I'm not sure if it's here today, but it's also available for purchase. As I hope you can see, Through the Rise is a different type of history book. With over 250 illustrated pages, we combine image and text to explore Canada's Great War from multiple perspectives. It is one of the first graphic histories released by a Canadian university press. Graphic histories resemble comics or graphic novels. However, like any historical study, the images, narrative, arguments are all based on research and documentation to assure a factual basis for the work. For instance, while it's fully illustrated, we include detailed references and endnotes. It is fitting that the theme of this afternoon's event is new approaches to Canadian military history, because that's exactly the intent Rob and I had in creating the book. We seek new ways to connect readers with an understanding of the war that may sometimes feel distant now or more than a century on. There's sometimes also a gulf between an academic book designed for an academic audience and more popular histories designed for the wider public. We hope Through the Rise appeals to readers of all ages, and especially those curious about new ways to study and teach history. Many educators have discovered the opportunities of graphic narrative for teaching and engaging students. Graphic novels in classrooms today is notable due to the old stigmas against comics that were once dismissed as unsophisticated literature for kids. It's still rare to see a work of graphic scholarship appear in a university press book, so that's what makes ours so unique. Why do we use a graphic history approach? I see three contributions it can make to our understanding of history. The first is to create accessible but critical sources that can reach audiences beyond the specialist academic community. The second is produce a rich learning resource suitable for classrooms and education. And third, it encourages historians to think more deeply about the interpretation and representation of the past. We hope that this innovative graphic history invites readers to reimagine the First World War through the eyes of those who lived it, and think deeply about how we visualize, remember, and commemorate the past. Given the vast scope of the war, we focused on the context surrounding a specific battle in August of 1917, known as Hill 70. As this is the main focus of the book, some background would be useful about the battle's place in the wider war effort. So in April 1917, Canadian troops had captured Vimy Ridge, but Allied offensives soon stalled across many fronts. To help break the stalemate of trench warfare, the new Canadian Corps commander, Lieutenant General Arthur Currie, was tasked with capturing Hill 70, a German stronghold near the French industrial town of Lens. Hill 70 is simply a map designation. It's named for a slope that's roughly 70 meters above sea level. The nearby town of Lens had been captured by the Germans in October of 1914 during the invasion of France. Almost a year later, in September 1915, during the Battle of Loos, the British Army attempted to wrest control of Hill 70, which came at the cost of tens of thousands of British casualties. 2 years of vicious fighting on the Western Front passed before Hill 70 would be contested again. In June 1917, Currie was appointed the first Canadian-born commander of the Canadian Corps, and his first assignment was planning the attack on Hill 70 and Lens. The objective was to capture the hill and divert German reinforcements away from the main British offensive in Passchendaele and Ypres. After securing the hill on August 15th, Canadian troops endured days of shelling, machine gun fire, and poison gas as they repelled relentless enemy counterattacks. Between August 21st and 25th, 2 Canadian divisions attempted to take control of Lens, but they were eventually pushed back. Nevertheless, Canadian troops had secured the high ground, and Germans never really attempted to retake the Hill 70 position for the rest of the war. The battle cost about 9,000 Canadian casualties, including almost 2,000 killed in just 10 days of fighting. The Germans, meanwhile, suffered perhaps as many as 25,000 casualties. Hill 70 has somewhat of a more elusive character than some of the better-known Canadian battles. That can be found in the fact that it's named for an otherwise nondescript geographic feature. The legacy of Hill 70 within the wider war effort is also complicated. On the one hand, it was an unqualified success by the standards of the Western Front, but it also shows that such achievements came at a profound price in human lives. The attempt to take Lens in late August failed at a high cost. And the aim to divert German troops away from the Passchendaele front was never fully achieved. Likewise, the British offensive itself faltered in the north, and by October 1917, Canadian Corps had been transferred to the muddy killing fields of Passchendaele, and during this time, thousands more Canadians would be killed and wounded. In the decades after the war, the Battle of Hill 70 partly faded from Canadian memory, as it was caught between the more famous Battle of Vimy Ridge 3 months before and the more infamous Battle of Passchendaele 2 months later. Hill 70, as Canada's forgotten victory, has been largely corrected through the work of the Hill 70 Memorial Project. And in fact, this book wouldn't be possible without the wider commemorative efforts of the Hill 70 Project. In addition to fundraising for the creation of a monument in France, the Hill 70 Project created education kits that were distributed to thousands of high schools across Canada. And as part of these packages, a few years ago, Rob and I created 2 short graphic novel-style booklets that were designed for students. There was a good deal of interest from teachers and educators in these books, and in 2019, Hill 70 Project generously funded the creation of this much more substantial volume. The book itself is divided into 6 chapters. The first explains my illustrated approach to history and uses examples of wartime photography and art to consider what constitutes an accurate representation of the war. The second chapter details Currie's rise as Corps commander and his challenging role planning the Hill 70 attack. Then in chapters 3 and 4, we tell 2 stories of a lieutenant who led the platoon in the attack on Hill 70 and a private who was killed in the fighting at Lens. Lieutenant Brock Chisholm earned the Military Cross at Hill 70, and his name may be familiar because in later life he was Director General of the World Health Organization. Private Frederick Lee was one of the very few Canadians of Chinese ancestry to serve in the infantry. Given limited records about Lee's life and service, that chapter explores how historians piece together a narrative beyond archival traces. Chapters 5 and 6 then use different artistic styles to feature vignettes of several participants in the battle, including 6 Canadians who received the Victoria Cross at Hill 70. As the illustrator for this volume, I'll now speak about some of the artistic choices and challenges when attempting to illustrate the past. When reporting on the Battle of Hill 70, a Toronto Globe correspondent remarked that no artist can paint the horrors of the battlefield or convey in adequate terms what the fighting in the Lons region has meant for Canadian lads who have gone through it. So this reporter correctly noted that no painter could truly represent the experiences of being in battle under fire and gas while surrounded by scenes of carnage and death. At Hill 70, just as in any battle, neither visual arts nor the written word can truly capture the destructive scale of the operations, the deep emotions of the thousands of soldiers involved, or the personal meaning of their struggles. Yet, in this graphic history through their eyes, we have attempted to visualize the horrors and heroism of the battle and convey what the fighting had meant to several individuals. In doing so, we have used this graphic history approach to explore how to imagine and interpret the First World War in different art forms from different perspectives. In the book, we argue that representations of the past are not meant to be precise reconstructions. Truth and authenticity are not simply found in realistic depictions that claim accuracy in every detail. The seeming objectivity of photographs or the lifelike realism of highly realistic traditional art can in fact obscure the uncertainties and unknowns that historians grapple with when attempting to convey the complexity of the past. Historians do not simply reconstruct an event based only on available archival traces, such as letters and diaries. They also engage in a creative process of connection, construction, and imagination based on historical research to assemble coherent and meaningful narratives. The subjectivity of drawing and the limitations of sequential art to depict individual snapshots visualizes this interpretive research approach. The pictures assume greater meaning and context once readers mentally connect a series of images with both one another as well as with the text. So the book's introduction opens with one of the most famous images of the war, Canadian troops going over the top. You've likely seen this image in different contexts in media. It's especially used around Remembrance Day as a representation, iconic representation of the First World War. So in attempting to capture a truthful image of the war, photographers and artists worked to achieve authenticity in different ways. Canada's official war photographer, Ivor Castle, who took that photo, did so by claiming first-hand experiences documenting scenes of Canadian troops at or near the front lines. He described his work implying that it had taken place under fire. He produced this iconic over-the-top image that appeared to show a genuine action shot. It was in fact pieced together from photos taken during training exercises. The explosion clouds in the background were imposed later. In cutting and combining a real photograph to produce the scene, an artist engages in the process of imaginative creation, but the final image, in this case a manufactured photo, could appear realistic enough to leave viewers with the impression it had been taken at the time of the actual event. This example made me think about why we might call this stitched together photo a fake, while accepting an artistic interpretation of a battle as an impression. During the war, many soldier artists who experienced the fighting and witnessed the shattered landscape moved away from the realism favored in 19th century military paintings. A good example of that older style is Richard Jacques' Second Ypres. For many of the new generation of soldier artists, truth and authenticity could be revealed by modernist abstract designs or emotional expression rather than technical accuracy or lifelike realism. Some art critics at the time expressed a clear preference for realistic and representational art. Arthur Curry likewise favored realism in paintings and regarded abstract methods as what he called freak pictures. So how might my art, in Through Their Eyes, be evaluated by critics such as these? It could be judged by how closely a picture resembles reality, the past as it was, or at least as we think it was. To give an example of this process, we begin with a simple black and white sketch, then fill in color, shadow, shape to give it depth and meaning. But maybe some of the details are off. With enough time and effort, a realistic depiction could be achieved, but any drawing would fall short of photorealism. So why not replace the details with extracts of actual photos? And then why stop at the guns and the helmets? Why not replace the entire scene with bits of contemporary photos to achieve this realism? We end up with a faked photo, which may be accurate in small details, but the overall scene is as imagined as that first original sketch. I argue that attempting to get all the details precisely accurate reaches a point where a drawing must either pass into meticulous photorealism or retreat into a simpler, more expressive, and even more cartoon style. A comic panel in the style of those fabricated photos might achieve a type of photorealism, but I think a sequence of images in that style would be jarring to the viewer because they confuses the distinctions between real and faked. Graphic history emphasizes what viewers are or what readers are viewing is a construction that is informed by historical research and interpretation and assembled to produce a truthful, if not necessarily realistic, scene. In this graphic history, we have attempted to show how we can visualize the war in these different artistic styles from different perspectives. Curry's perspective from strategic perspective from high command, a junior officer like Brock Chisholm at the platoon level, the 6th Victoria Cross recipients, and an ordinary Canadian like Frederick Lee, and many other lesser-known individuals who did not survive. By provoking questions about historical accuracy, truth, and meaning, this work is both focused on a specific battle of the First World War, as well as interested in expanding the ways that history may be researched, shared, and represented. Combining text and image, combining text and image only, not only invite readers to consider different ways to interpret history, is also importantly helps us to consider our own role in connecting, constructing, and imagining the stories of the past that we tell. I hope what I've shared today prompts everyone to consider picking up a copy of Through Their Eyes. I'd say how pleased I am with the overall design work by McGill Queens. I mean, if you just take a look at the actual copy, it's a substantial volume, and I think it'd be a great gift, a great piece on a coffee table. I'd like to mention briefly, I do have another book called Scandalous Conduct, which is available in paperback, as I mentioned, from UBC Press. So this book examines how changing definitions of scandalous behavior in military culture shape the quintessential honor crime known as conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman. It details the circumstances under which hundreds of Canadian officers lost their commissions for all sorts of offenses, ranging from cowardice and indecency to drunkenness and fraud. Lots of fascinating stories of crime, scandal, and occasional redemption for these Canadian ex-officers during both World Wars. To return to Through Their Eyes, I'd like to conclude with a thought about those who fell at Hill 70. About 2,000 Canadians were killed in the fighting or died of wounds. The bodies of half of this number were lost to the battlefield and never recovered for proper burial. The names on the screen represent those with no known grave. The size of each name signifies the number of soldiers with that name. So, for instance, Smith, as the largest, represents about 20 individuals. In total, this page represents about 1,000 soldiers. I find this image particularly poignant to conclude on, because in recent years, the remains of now 8 Canadians have been found at Hill 70. They've been found, identified, and reburied in an official war cemetery. Some of you may have seen the recent news that DND's casualty identification program was able to put the name to now an 8th Canadian who was killed at Hill 70. Someone who's lost in the carnage of the war and in the movements of mass armies is that each of the scenes that we depict represented a unique person and story. Throughout this book, we have attempted to combine arts, narrative, and historical research to visualize and personalize experiences from the Battle of Hill 70, as well as place these individuals and events within the wider context of the war effort. What I hope through their eyes shows is that reimagining and narrating these experiences can give voice to the ordinary Canadians who endured the battle now 105 years ago. Thank you.